What's up, everybody? Welcome back in. This is Hawk Talk on Melrose. I am Collin, joined today with Tyler. Tyler, we are officially, as we are recording this on Saturday, July 13th, we are 49 days away from being back in Kinnick Stadium. We are 42 days away from college football beginning. We're 10 days away from Big Ten Media Days, and we are 2 days away from College Football 25 video games. So there's a lot happening here very, very quickly. We are getting so close to the season, and as you can tell, I'm getting very excited, and I'm sure you are too.
Yeah, you were telling me the other day, you're like, do you realize, like, I tweeted out over 50 days ago that we're 100 days away from college football, and it didn't like register in my mind that it had been over 50 days since you had done that already. It's just that's how fast this summer goes with just our busy schedules, as well as the time that flies by. So it's crazy. I'm so super excited. We're on that almost that home stretch of like week 0 coming sooner rather than later. So I can't wait.
So around this time of year, middle of summer, we're still a little ways away from the college football season. I always like reading the college football preview magazines. I usually get Lindy's, Athlon's, and then Phil Steele's. To me, I like Phil Steele's the most. I think it's the most accurate, has a lot of information, but he uses a lot of different numbers, a lot of different trends that kind of backs up what he has to say. And even if you just kind of skim through the pages, you get a good read, a good feel about each team. So what we're going to do today is we are going to preview the Big Ten, kind of using what Phil Steele has to say and some of the different trends and things like that to make it almost kind of like a 2-for-1 in this episode. Because every year I like to preview the Big Ten, but I know it can get a little boring just going through each team and a little bit about each team. So we're going to make it a little bit fun using kind of what Phil Steele has to say and some of the different trends and things like that. And then we're obviously going to touch a lot on what Phil Steele has to say about Iowa, because after all, this is an Iowa-centric podcast. So we will also touch on that as well. Before we begin the show, though, if you're watching us on YouTube, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and please leave a comment of any kind, whether it's a question that we can answer or a suggestion or whatever. If you're listening to us on any of our many other podcast platforms, please hit that follow button. And lastly, if you have friends, family members, coworkers, someone that you may know that would enjoy our channel, please share this with them. That'd be very helpful for us, and we truly appreciate the support. All right, so Phil Steele, man. Let's go first over his 1 through 18. And I'm just going to list it down the row of what he thinks the Big Ten is going to finish. Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, Michigan, Iowa, USC, Nebraska, Rutgers, Wisconsin, Maryland, Washington, Indiana, Illinois, UCLA, Minnesota, Northwestern, Purdue, and Michigan State. What do you find in just that? Like, just any surprises, any like, wow, I can't believe this team is here? Or, that makes sense. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the thing that jumps out at me, the national champion Michigan Wolverines are going to potentially drop off a little bit. I think a lot of that has to do with what they, sent to the NFL, including a head coach in Jim Harbaugh. So that sticks out to me a little bit. They have them, 4th right now. So a little bit of a drop off. And a lot of new players, a lot of like question marks, I would say, at Michigan a little bit. Oregon coming in from the Pac-12, national title contender, obviously, with what they have brought in, and we'll probably touch on it at quarterback. Obviously, really good head coach. Ohio State, they went all in this offseason to try to make a national championship run. I mean, they're always in the conversation, but it really feels different this year. Feels like they really focused on defense. And so, yeah, they're right at the top. Iowa in the mix in the upper half of this new Big Ten. Really, I know It's probably like a homer comment, but I really feel like, we're right in that 4 range right now. And that's a good sign early. So those are my few things that I've looked at. And as you mentioned it, you read off the order there, that kind of jumped out at me.
Do you think with Ohio State, and obviously, yes, like they're always, it's national title, like, or bust almost every single year because of the talent they bring in, but it really makes you wonder, like seeing Michigan, their biggest rival last year, how much of like, for them now, it's like, gosh, we really need
2 or 3 years in a row.
Yes. And then obviously them winning the Natty.
Correct. Yeah.
It puts even more like we need to win a Natty.
It's
like
a
sooner
boomer
rather
bust.
than later.
Well, you got to beat Michigan. Like that Ohio State has to do that, or I
Yep.
legitimately think like Ryan Day had question marks if he was like going to return or not, just because that game means so much. And then, you know, the fact that they, like you said, they actually went on to win the national championship, like there's a lot of pressure, I think, at Ohio State, but there always is. That's just the nature of that job. So
Yep. So for me, some of like the surprises to me, like seeing like Nebraska right at number 7. But when we get into this a little bit later on, you're going to see, okay, what, like I can see why Phil Steele has them at number 7 because they bring
yeah,
back a lot of players, especially on the defense. And their defense last year, or I should say 2022, their defense was horrible. And they, obviously bringing Matt Rule, bringing a new DC, and their defense, they switched to a 3-3-5. And they were really good last year. And they bring back pretty much all the starters besides a few. They lose a couple of their linebackers, but their defensive line is going to be really good. And they have a really easy
yeah,
schedule. Another team like Rutgers, same thing. Like very easy schedule for the most part. They avoid Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, who else? Oregon, Iowa. They avoid this year.
yeah,
And they're another team where like they bring back like their pretty much their entire offensive line. They bring back their stud running back. They bring in the Minnesota transfer quarterback, Ethan Kalakamankis or whatever his name is. I can never know how to pronounce his last name. But he comes in. Is he that good? Probably. I mean, that's the thing with Rutgers. I feel like they're always like mid at quarterback, but you at least have a solid starter, I should say. And then they have a pretty good defense. So like I can see why he
yeah,
puts them at number 8. And then another one, like seeing Washington, right? Like go from a national championship down to number 11 makes sense though. They are literally losing every single person. And I don't know if you
yeah,
read this quote in the Phil Steele magazine where he was asking when he goes and visits all these schools, he was asking Wisconsin or Washington for some pictures of some players, and the person was literally like, "Well, we don't like have anybody that's like in a Washington uniform that are like that's new because like everybody that's like coming
yeah,
back is like new players from different teams, which is just crazy to think about." So you
yeah,
go from, like I said, national championship down to number 11. And I'll just say this with just all 4 teams in general coming to the Big Ten. The trend when new teams join a conference, they are not very good right away. Like it takes kind of almost kind of like a year to like learn the new conference. And so you might see teams like Washington, UCLA, USC might struggle a little bit because they're bringing back a lot of new players. Like
yeah,
Oregon, I think they're fine because they're just that good, that talented. Where I think that they're going to be able to manage the new Big Ten. But those other 3 schools, like even like USC in a way, like
yeah.
there might be a game or two in there where you think they're going to win, like USC at Minnesota. It's going to be a little bit more challenging than you think.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve for most of these teams. Like you said, that's just the nature of the conference, the kind of the style of play that this conference maybe brings out, and maybe a team specifically like USC, like just a more of a tough ground and pound type of conference compared to them throwing the ball over the yard in the Pac-12 like a lot of them did. But yeah, you make a great point about Washington too. I mean, they're in the national title game. They got decimated by the transfer portal, and
Yeah.
I mean, they're a team that's obviously is gonna take, I think, a second for them, but they do have a new head coach that built up a team like Arizona. So
Yeah, I really like Jed Fish.
yeah,
I think he's a good head coach, but might take a year or
might take
two
a
to.
second. Yep.
Yep. So let's get into now Phil Steele's individual units where he ranks 1 through 68. Some of them he has like up to 70. And this is all of college football. This is not just the Big Ten. And he kind of ranks where these teams kind of end up. And we're not going to go through each team, but I want to hit on a few for each position group. So we'll start with quarterbacks. And he has the 3rd best Oregon with Dylan Gabriel, transfer from Oklahoma. So you lose Bo Nix, which sucks, but you bring in arguably probably the best quarterback that you can think of in Dylan Gabriel and their quarterback room. And then they also brought in UCLA transfer Dante Moore. So they have a really good quarterback room. And then you have Penn State at number 16. The one thing I will say is like, that's it for the top 15. He just has
Yeah.
Oregon. And then it kind of drops off a little bit. Then you got Penn State at 16, Drew Aller. You got 19 at Ohio State, Will Howard, which my thoughts on him, like I think he's a good quarterback. I just don't know like how much better is Will Howard than Kyle McCord from last year.
Yep. I
Like,
100% agree
you
with
know what I
you on
mean?
that. Yep.
And then we'll go all the way down then to 47. He has Iowa with Cade McNamara, transfer from Michigan, obviously from 2022, and then Brennan Sullivan. So the quarterback room is much improved. What do you think we'd be ranked right now if, like, let's just say we didn't have Cade and we had Deacon Hill, we'd be like 130th right now, right? So 47th honestly isn't bad. And then there's a few other teams kind of sprinkled in there. But I don't know. I mean, seeing in like USC 25, they got that Miller guy, they lose Caleb Williams, which sucks for them, but with Lincoln Riley, they're always going to be good offensively. So it's like, it's almost kind of like Phil Parker's defense where you just kind of reload and it's good the next year.
Yeah. I think the Big Ten in general might, like, I think I even brought it up, like, I mean, this is kind of a side note, but like the EA, when we're talking about EA college football, the rankings came out for like the top 100 players. And I even mentioned to you, I'm like, a lot of like Big Ten quarterbacks aren't on there. And you're like, well, if you think about it, I mean, the Big Ten isn't always known for like the best quarterback play. And so it kind of makes sense with Phil Steele's rankings a little bit that you've got some top end talent with Oregon, but then there is a bit of a drop off. And so, I don't know if that means a better chance for some of these other teams to kind of compete more. I don't know, but it is interesting when you look at it.
Running backs, on the other hand, though, we have 3 Big Ten schools in the top 15. You got Ohio State at number 1 with Travion Henderson, and then the Ole Miss transfer. They'll just talk about absolute two-headed monster there. And then Penn State's Nicholas Singleton and Creighton Allen, which they were both freshmen last year. They both had great year. One had over 1,000 yards. The other one had like over 800. So expect them to be really good. That kind of dynamic duo between those two. And then Minnesota. Seems like every year Minnesota always has a good running back. This year, Darius Taylor, he was a transfer from Western Michigan in 2022, comes in last year, has a really, really good year. And then they also brought in 3 transfers that were all starters at some point at their previous schools. So they're going to be loaded at running back as well.
Again, you think about the Big Ten and what the Big Ten does is, like, a lot of teams like to run the football, and there's a lot of really good, deep, and talented rosters that, specifically with the running back rooms and some of these teams. It's going to be, I think, a really good year for running backs in the Big Ten.
And Iowa at 39, which we have, like, I think the way Phil Steele looks at this is, okay, you have LaShawn Williams, you have Caleb Johnson, you have some of these other guys, but and LaShawn Williams really has kind of broke out to be a really good player, but like, we're still waiting on that Caleb Johnson. Like, can he really take that next step? Like, we saw it freshman year in a way, right? We and then like last year, unfortunately, he was hurt from time to time, but he hasn't really taken that next, just being that all around complete running back. And I think if like he can get to that, I think our running back room is way higher than 39. But for right now, I can see why Phil Steele has us at 39.
And just the way we've struggled a little bit last year, specifically to run the football, I think might have something to do with it too. But
and a lot of that was the scheme, the poor offensive line play and things like that. All right, wide receivers, number 1. I was very shocked by this, but Iowa at number. No, I'm just kidding. What?
Okay.
What if?
That wouldn't be worth. That magazine would be, the most fake magazine you've ever purchased if that was the case. But that's a good one.
I think he has Iowa, and this is just for the Big Ten. He has Iowa at like 17th in the Big Ten for receivers. Yeah, which makes sense, right? I'm not gonna get mad at that. It sucks, until we prove it. But all right. But anyways, back to wide receivers. Number 1, Oregon. So he has Oregon as the number 1 wide receiver unit in the country. Tez Johnson. They just got some other players. Brought in that transfer from Texas A&M. Like, they're going to be really good. And then you got Ohio State at number 3. Igbuka's back. They got that Jeremiah Smith, who's that stud freshman that's coming in. That's just going to be the next best Ohio State wide receiver. USC at number 5. They lose 2 wide receivers, but once again, going back to what I said about 5 minutes ago, they just reload and they always have studs on the outside. And then I thought this was interesting. You go down a little bit, number 27, Indiana. So you don't see Indiana very often in these like top 15, top 30 things. And they bring in 5 transfers. You got the head coach from JMU. They brought in a shit ton of transfers. And like I said, wide receiver being one of them, bringing in 5. And so Phil Steele expects big things out of them. They got a transfer from like JMU who had over 1,100 yards, guy from Texas Tech who had over 1,100 yards. So expect them to be pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little shocked. Oregon number one. I thought Ohio State would be number one. Their wide receiver U as of late. So I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
insane that Oregon and Ohio State and USC are all in the top five there.
And let's
So
face it, like Igbuka could have easily went to the NFL. So like he
yeah,
turns that down, comes
that's what
back,
I
and then
mean.
you bring in
Yep.
Jeremiah Smith, like, and they got some other,
Yeah.
and that's just those two guys. Like they still have like other just
Yep.
stud players as well. Offensive line, Oregon at 3 with 3 starters back, Ohio State at 12, and then Wisconsin rounding out the top 15 at number 15, and then Minnesota I just have in here as well at number 24. They bring back 4 starters. The only really position that they lose is center, so expect Minnesota, along with what we were just talking about, their running backs. Expect pretty solid running game out of Minnesota.
Yeah, and I think with Wisconsin, having a little bit better O line, I think they're looking to be a lot better than they were in year one under Luke Fickell. I think they could be a team that makes a decent jump this second year.
Yeah, that was definitely something that like last year that they struggled. Like it just
Yeah.
wasn't that typical Wisconsin, which
Yep.
I know it's not going to be that anymore with Luke Fickell, but it definitely was like, it's weird seeing that, like seeing kind of like
Yeah.
a Wisconsin offensive line that's not as good.
Dominant. Yep.
Yeah, because we're so used to growing up, just Wisconsin always just having a dominant
Churning
offensive
out.
line. Yep. Iowa at 41. So 5 starters back, 4 seniors, 154 career starts, which is a lot. But I can,
Yep.
once again, I can see why he puts them at 41, even though we're bringing back all this experience until we show that this offensive line, because these are the same guys I've played last year, the same guys I've played in 2022. They have yet to kind of show that they can take that next step. And so I think if they can, I think this team is way higher than 41. But until then, like I respect the number being at 41. Defensive line. Got a lot of Big Ten schools in the top 15. Ohio State at 1, Penn State at 2, Michigan at 4, Nebraska at 5. So literally 4 in the top 5, and then 13 at Iowa. All 4 starters back for Iowa that, according to Phil Steele, are Big Ten caliber. The depth is a little bit of an issue, but being in the top 15, I think is really good.
Yeah, really good front sevens, especially at the top here in the Big Ten. And like you mentioned, Ohio State's got a ton of talent. Their defense is going to be one of the better defenses, I think, in all of the country. Michigan's not going anywhere. Penn State, I mean, these teams are known for really good defenses. Nebraska, obviously, ending the year really solidly on defense, and they're bringing a lot of guys back, especially on the D line, that are really good players too. So
linebackers, I'm not lying when I say this. I know at wide receiver, I said Iowa at 1, but in linebackers, we are the number 1 unit, according to Phil Steele, bringing back 3 of our top tacklers at linebacker. I think he's including Sebastian, obviously, as a linebacker, because more times than not, that's kind of the position that he is playing. And then 6, Penn State, 7, Oregon, 9, Wisconsin, and number 12, Ohio State.
yeah, really no surprise with Iowa, just the production that they had at linebacker last year, and literally getting all the guys to come back, 10 starters on defense in total. Like a really, really good unit. Don't have any concerns there at all. A lot of studs.
D-backs, 1, Ohio State, Iowa at number 5, which is cool to see.
Yeah.
Or Michigan at 8, Penn State at 9, 11, Oregon, 12, Wisconsin, and then 22, Rutgers. So a lot of teams kind of in that top 15, and then obviously Rutgers just below that at 22.
Yep. I have nothing really more to say about that. I mean, obviously Iowa's going to be up there again, returning a ton of guys, specifically on defense. So no issues there. I mean, should be really, really good again. I mean, this is kind of showing that, right? Our the front 7 as well as the back 7 is really solid, and I mean that's no surprise under the GOAT Phil Parker. So, and getting those guys to return.
So what I did on, and if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll be able to see this chart. Is I made a chart of all the teams and then the position groups: quarterback, running back, receivers, O-line, D-line, linebacker, DBs, and I color coded. So if you're in the top 15, you get a light green. If you're in the anywhere from 16 to, like I said, like some positions he went all the way to 68, some he went all the way up to like 70, and I put that in light blue, and you can kind of see where the kind of the teams stack up. And then if you're in the whites, you weren't ranked in the top 68. And so you look at like Iowa, for example, we got 3 units in the top 15 and 3 units in the 16 through 68 range, and then we got 1, which is receivers that are not ranked. You look at like teams like Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, they're elite for a reason. Ohio State, 6 top
Yep.
15s, Oregon, 5. And you kind of start going down the list and you can see how it's starting to a little bit less and less and less and less. And then you get to way towards the bottom and you're not ranked at all, or you have a couple position groups that are 16 through 68.
Yeah. I think it just shows a good job of like the in terms of like maybe the top half being really, really solid at with certain players, and there's definitely a drop off when you get to about half and below. So really, really top heavy at a lot of position groups, and then it really drops off there, which is a good graph to really look at. I like that a lot.
How about Indiana and Rutgers, man?
Yeah,
look at that. Both of them have
yep
6 and then 5. I mean, that's really good for two programs that are usually not that talented.
And we're not very good last year. So yeah.
It's crazy. All right, so let's get to the next thing that Phil Steele has that I always like looking at, and that is the experience chart. And so this is a lot of information that I'm going to try to summarize it very, very quickly. But he actually has Iowa as the number 1 returning in the Big Ten in this experience chart, and then 4th overall in the NCAA. And what he takes into account is the seniors that are like starters that are on the 2 deep, because at the end of the day, like those guys that have the most experience. And then he also takes into account the percentage of Letterman players returning, the percentage of total yards, receiving, passing, and rushing coming back, the percent of tackles. So obviously the number of tackles coming back for the players, and then offensive line, career starts, and then big plays on defense, which takes into account like interceptions, fumbles, sacks, things like that. And so Iowa is his number 4 in the country. And then for another thing that I always look at with Phil Steele is this one where he has close wins and close losses. And so what he does is he found, I don't know how many years ago this was, but like maybe like 20 years ago, he started tracking this where if a team has a lot of close losses a year before, more times than not, depending on how many close losses they had, the next year they rebound and have a better year. And then vice versa. Like if they have a lot of close wins, usually the next year they end up having a worse record. For example, so if last year, if you had 4+ net close losses, the percentage of having a stronger or same next year is 89%, which is absolutely crazy. If you have 2 or more net close losses, the percentage of having a stronger or same record as last year or this year is 75%. So that pretty much shows you like the trend is if you have a lot of net close losses, you're going to rebound the following year. And so obviously has a lot of teams on here. I just took what the Big Ten had. So Nebraska had 5 net close losses last year, and then Indiana, Maryland, Oregon have 2. So you look at like a team like Nebraska, who I think what did they finish last year? 4-8, I think, or 4-8, I believe. So the trend is they have an 89% chance of having a stronger or same year as last year. And I think everything points to that, like, right? Like everyone expects Nebraska to be a bowl eligible team. Hell, some have them going 8-4, 9-3, right? Because of their schedule. So I thought that was very interesting. And then you have like teams like Indiana, Maryland, who once again, their records last year weren't great. Yeah. So they, according to Phil Steele, according to this trend, they have a very good shot of having a better year this year.
When you think about it, I mean, like, when you dive deeper into the stats, specifically with like a team like Nebraska and their 5 losses, I mean, it came down, they were -17 in the turnover ratio, right? So if you believe that a second year under a guy like Matt Rule can clean that up, those close losses turns into close wins or
exactly
wins, right? And so it's just a few minor things you clean up that really could sway that the other way.
And then vice versa. Now you have, close wins last year. And so you look at this previous year, 6 or 7 net close wins. They have a 91% or almost 92% of a weaker or same record the following year. And so you have a team like Washington who had 7 close wins last year. So they have a 91% chance of having a weaker or as, the same, which they had a really good season. Obviously their record wise last year, the chances of them having the same record is very small, but that goes in once again to the account of like where everybody expects them to drop off this year. And this trend kind of shows that. Iowa makes a list on here and Northwestern. They both have 4 net close wins last year, which if you look at this chart, then that means that they have an 83% chance of having a weaker or same record. And so you look at Iowa last year, they went 10-2. So I think that kind of, that trend kind of fits because I kind of expect kind of like a 10-2 season. So that would be the same record as last year. Northwestern, same thing. Like they had such a good year in year one under Bronze. Like I fully expect a little bit of a drop off, which that would make a little bit of sense looking at this trend alone.
Yep. Yep. There's a lot of different factors I'm sure that go into this. Like we already mentioned with Washington, they lose a lot of the top players and talent that they had. It makes sense they'd have a little bit, down year. Iowa, whether it was, all the wins that we had were basically close. I mean, you can go either way with a lot of that. And so, yeah, if you have and you take the next step on offense and you are a little bit better, hopefully that, goes the other way. But and like Northwestern, overachieved. I mean, a team that we thought might not win a game goes and has an incredible year.
Yeah. What did they even finish last year? I know they were bowl eligible last year. I forgot what their record was though. Were they 7-5? I think they might have been. But regardless, so
yes, they were 7-5.
7-5, yeah. Regardless, like with Iowa, I guarantee you they're on this chart every single year because they're
that's always, what I mean.
Yeah,
it's just we don't blow anybody out usually, right? Like this, we're not built that way. We're not, so like we're always having this conversation. I mean, this is nothing new. You're exactly right.
All right, the next one I want to do is Phil Steele's going up and going down, takes in account like the schedule and everything like that. And he has two teams in the Big Ten that he projects will have a better year this year because of the easier schedule compared to last year. And those two teams are Indiana and Rutgers. I feel like we've kind of talked about these two teams a lot, right? Like, they're bringing back a lot of guys. Well, Rutgers is, Indiana's bringing a lot of transfers. And then they have both of them very manageable, pretty easy schedules for the most part.
Yeah. I mean, you look at that and there's no more divisions, right? So you're not always having to play, the Ohio States and Michigans of the world. So, and the Penn States. And so, some of these teams, on a year-to-year basis will benefit from, quote unquote, a little bit easier schedule. So it definitely makes sense.
And then going down, these are 86% chance of having a drop off because of the difference or harder schedule this year compared to last year. And these four teams, once again, all make sense. UCLA, very tough schedule. Michigan, Washington, Northwestern. And not only that, but a lot of these teams are reloading from the year prior. You look at UCLA losing their head coach, losing their defensive coordinator to USC. I think I forgot to mention that before, but you lose your stud defensive coordinator to your biggest rival USC, which that's like Phil Parker going to Iowa State, which would just, can you imagine if that happened? So this makes sense for those four teams all kind of trending towards having a little bit worse of a year. And then they have, which I think this is really good, the Phil Steele's most surprise teams. And what he takes into account here is any team that is not in the AP poll top 10 that he thinks has a great shot of making the playoffs and obviously maybe even winning a natty. And he has Iowa on here at number 7, the only Big Ten school in his most surprise team.
A lot of people, I mean, and not just us homers, they look at the schedule, they look at what's coming back. There is a good chance to do something special this upcoming year.
And then Phil Steele's most improved teams, and I forgot what his percentages on here, but he has it in the magazine where he lists like his last like 24 years of doing the most improved teams, and it's like an insane number. Like he hits on like pretty much all of them all the time. And the two Big Ten schools he has on his most improved teams, it is 2 Nebraska and 4 Indiana. I don't think we got to touch on more about those two schools because we keep talking about them and how they're pretty much in all these trends of having definitely improved record this year. And then the last thing that I want to showcase from Phil Steele is his preseason top 40. So he has 2 different types of polls. He has a power poll, which is just taking into account the talent of the team. So for example, for that, he has Iowa at number 18. So that just takes into account just the talent of the team and nothing more. But then he does a preseason top 40 where he's taking into account like everything. He takes into account the talent, he takes into account the experience, he takes into account the strength of the schedule, he takes into account the schedule itself.
The
And he
stuff we've
has,
talked about.
yeah, and he has his top 40. So I'm going to list his top 40. And I guess he goes all the way to like 60, but his top 40 is Ohio State at 2, Oregon at 3, Penn State at 5, 9 Michigan, 11 Iowa, 25 USC, 33 Nebraska, 41 Wisconsin, 54 Rutgers, and 60 Indiana.
You got like 8 teams in the Big Ten that are specifically in the top 40 and 10 of them that are in the top 60. So, I mean, a lot of good indicators that the Big Ten should be a pretty good conference this year, with Ohio State and Oregon and really Penn State leading that top 5.
And then what about Iowa at number 11, which I thought was kind of cool to see, kind of giving us, and I think a lot of it has to do with the schedule and how it kind of plays out, where a lot of our very tough games are at home. The one game that you can pretty much count as a loss at this point is Ohio State, but everybody else, like, we're probably going to be favored in every single game, the rest of the schedule besides Ohio State, which is just crazy. And I think he takes obviously all that. And so, yeah, being number 11, that's pretty cool. I think, and we keep hammering on this, that like, this is the year to do it. Like if Iowa, there's a year to possibly make the playoffs, it's this year, because I'm not saying there's never going to be another year, but you see how all the defense that's going to be leaving after this year, and it's going to be kind of like a reload. And, you know, it might be another couple years or several years before we have a team like this team. So it's like, let's strike while the iron is hot. Right. So, and then the
a lot of things line up for Iowa to make some noise this year. So,
and so I made this graph, and if you're watching this on YouTube, you can view the graph on your screen right now. I'll do my best to explain it all, but I think it's really beneficial to kind of see where the teams stack up. So I have the Big Ten schools on the left-hand side, and then the columns on the top, I have 7 different categories. The first category is units ranked 1 through 68. So earlier we went through each position unit. There were 7 of them: quarterback, running back, receivers, O-line, D-line, linebackers, D-backs. If your team was listed in there, you get a number, right? So for example, Ohio State, they were listed on all 7 position units, so they get a number 7. Oregon was listed 6 out of the 7 times. So if you got 6 or 7, you get a green box. That's really good. If you're 4 through 5, you get a blue box. And if you're anything under a 4, so 1, 2, or 3, you get a red box, because that means you only had 1 position unit or maybe 2 position units that were in the top 68. The next column is strength of schedule. So this one's actually flipped around, because if you are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that means you have a very, very tough schedule, right? So like UCLA, number 1, that means they have the toughest schedule in the Big Ten. So they're going to get a red box. If you are 7 through 12, meaning kind of in the middle, you get a blue box. And then if you're 13 through 18th, you get a green box, meaning you have a very easy schedule or very manageable schedule. And then the next column is experience. So this one you can flip back around, because if you are 1 through 6, that means you have the most experience coming back in the Big Ten. So I gave you a green box. 7 through 12, you get a blue box. And then 13 through 18th, meaning that you are towards the bottom of experience coming back, you get a red box. Power poll, going back to what I was saying earlier, power poll is just taking into account the talent of the team, and that is it from Phil Steele. So if you're 1 through 6 in the Big Ten, you get a green box, 7 through 12, blue box, and then 13 through 18th, a red box. And then power rankings. Now, not every team is listed here because he only goes 1 through 60, but this is taking into account talent, strength of schedule, the schedule itself, and all those factors. And essentially, if you are in the top 6, you get a green box. If you are 6 through 10, you get a blue box. And then anything which not listed at all, you get a red box. And then special teams and coaches, that's pretty straightforward. Once again, you're 1 through 6. And special teams and coaching, that is really good. You get a green box and so forth. So I do want to mention, too, that the teams on the left-hand side is in order by how Phil Steele thinks the Big Ten is going to finish, or his power rankings of the Big Ten. So I just want to give that or just share that as well. So you can see visually this graph. You can kind of see the separation from the top to the bottom. More towards the top, a lot more greens and light blues. More towards the bottom, a lot more reds. I just want to pick a few teams I want to talk about. One being Michigan. You can see there, very talented team. Units ranked six in 6 out of the 7 for position units, fourth in the power pool, fourth in power ranking. So clearly talented. But the problem with them is their strength of schedule is the fourth hardest in the Big Ten, and they're second to last in experience coming back. So that's going to be a little difficult for them to manage. And that's why I think there is going to be a drop off. And I'm not just talking like a small little drop off, because last year they obviously went 15-0. I really do think that they're probably bound to lose at least 3 games this year, or maybe even 4, which I think first year head coach with, everybody that they lost, I still think that's a good year for Michigan. Some other schools, USC, another one in there where, they're very talented, but their strength of schedule is second hardest in the Big Ten. It's going to be very difficult to navigate. And experience-wise, they're 15th in the Big Ten. I do think that USC will have a better defense. Once again, they got the UCLA's defensive coordinator. They had a really good defense last year at UCLA. He comes over to USC. They brought in a lot of transfers, including some really good corners. So they should be clearly better on defense. But man, like when you have that tough as a schedule, that's going to be really, really difficult. Nebraska, another team, no reds. They're all greens and light blues. They have the 16th easiest schedule in the Big Ten. They have the third most experience coming back. Really, for Nebraska, it all comes down to, can they stop being the typical Nebraska team that turns the ball over a lot, that loses those close games? And if they can turn that around, look out. And then you start getting more towards kind of the bottom of the Big Ten. Start with Washington. I know we kind of talked about them a little bit. They have the 6th hardest schedule in the Big Ten. Another team where, like, number one, not only do they have a tough schedule, but, this is their first year in the Big Ten. So they haven't really played any of these teams. So I think it's going to be kind of difficult to navigate that first year. Experience, they're dead last. I do think that they have some good transfers. I think Jed Fish is a great coach, but it might take a year or two to get them back up and swinging. UCLA, another team. I do think that they have some talent across the board. They got Eric Bieniemy, the offensive coordinator, who was at the Chiefs and then was at the Washington Commanders, and now there. So I think that they're going to be talented, but they have the toughest schedule in the Big Ten, and they don't have a lot of experience coming back. And then the bottom 2 teams, Purdue and Michigan State. We'll start with Purdue. Ryan Walters, second year as a head coach for Purdue. He was a defensive coordinator for Illinois before coming to Purdue, so he's kind of a defensive-minded coach. So their defense should be better. You got Hudson Card coming back. He was a quarterback last year for them, who did a pretty good job as quarterback in year 1. And so you expect a better team, but the problem with Purdue is they have a very tough schedule, 3rd toughest in the Big Ten. And then Michigan State, new head coach, Jonathan Smith from Oregon State, who I think is a really good coach, but it just might take some time. They had a lot of transfers. They did bring in the defensive coordinator from Minnesota, who was a really good DC, but similar to Purdue, they have a tough schedule at Maryland, Ohio State, at Oregon, Iowa, Michigan, on the road. So I feel like it's going to be very difficult to overcome in year 1, but I do think Michigan State, as the years go on with Jonathan Smith, will be a pretty good team.
It's a lot of different factors. I mean, no one factor is going to probably outweigh the other when you look at the entire thing. But like you mentioned, just some of the key ones, the strength of schedule, the experience, the players that and coaches that are back. I mean, a lot of that matters. Like you said, for Michigan, I mean, they lost so much. Like I don't think people realize, like, losing Jim Harbaugh is going to be a big thing. Like Sherrone Moore is not Jim Harbaugh. I think he's a really good coach. I think he deserved to be the head coach. But I mean, that's Jim Harbaugh, whether you like him or not. Like, he built a really good culture there and developed the national championship team, which Michigan had been a long time. So I think it's hard to replace all that. Yeah.
What are your thoughts? I know we haven't touched really on this team, but what are your thoughts on Penn State this year? So I have them at number 3.
I like their defense a lot. Again, that's pretty much a staple. I think the only thing, and they don't have, I mean, I'm pretty sure, I'm going to look really quick. So yeah, they avoid, I mean, just look at their schedule. They avoid Michigan, Iowa, Oregon, and they get Ohio State at home. So their schedule
lines up really good. Yeah.
I think lines up good. The thing about James Franklin, he's 3-17 against top 10 opponents. And I just feel like until you get over that hump. And a lot of it has to do with this playing the Michigans, Ohio States, and all the, being in the East Division every year. I get that. So if there ever was a year to break through, I think it has to be maybe this year with James Franklin. So yeah, I don't know. They have the schedule to do it. It's a matter of, and I think the quarterback to do it. I think Drew Hour is a really good quarterback. They got to prove it though.
I keep forgetting too. They got who did they get at wide receiver from Ohio State? Julius
Oh yeah,
Fleming.
Julian
Yep, they got
Fleming.
him,
Yeah.
which they badly needed because like their receiving core is
Well, and
not.
they lost their best receiver, that Keandre Lambert-Smith, to Auburn in the transfer
Oh, I
portal.
forgot about that. I'm glad you brought
So
that
they've
up.
got
Yeah,
Julian Fleming, but he was like
that's
number
really
one.
it.
That number one, that Keandre Lambert-Smith. That I don't know. There's a lot of question marks at receiver, I feel like, for them.
And then didn't they lose? God, who was their stud tight end last year? Theo Johnson. Was that Theo Johnson? I think he got drafted, but losing him too is big as well. And then just a couple other teams that I feel like we didn't really touch on that much. Wisconsin, right? I have them at number 9. They're bringing in Tyler Van Dyke from Miami, which had a really good freshman year. And then the last 2 years kind of struggled a little bit. So it's going to be interesting to see. We're now in the second year under Luke Fickell. I think a lot of people expected last year, kind of what happened was kind of expected, right? First year in this new system. It's going to take some time. So they should be better this year. They got that quarterback. I don't know if he's that much better than who they had last year, which I can't even think of his name right now. But defensively, they should be better. They have 8 starters back, but man, the schedule for them is really tough this year.
I know, man. You look at some of these teams and you're like, I really like their team, but then their schedule's hard. Or you look at their schedule and it's like, man, they have a favorable schedule, but they lost a lot of guys. So it's going to be interesting. And like I do believe though, I think Oregon. I mean, I know, I think that Ohio State Oregon game is going to be insane. I think that might determine a lot. But I think Oregon's got they're that new team coming to the Big Ten that has, the NIL backing to get a guy like Dylan Gabriel. They've got the head coach in place that clearly is a hell of a coach in Dan Lanning. They bring some of that physical style to the Big Ten. I mean, Oregon, I still feel like he's kind of known as a physical team.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think them and Ohio State, I think, are the clear front runners for this conference, just looking at it right now. But Penn State and Michigan, Iowa, they'll have something to say about it too.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that Ohio State Oregon game on what is it, October 12th, it's going to be insane. NBC primetime game. Like,
and the last time they played,
much better than that.
Oregon beat them when they weren't supposed
to.
Oh
yeah,
and that was Ohio State.
Yep. That was a game right before the Iowa State game in 2021. I remember watching that game. That game was insane. And then before we ended, then just the 2 schools in Illinois that I want to talk, because I feel like we haven't really touched on Illinois. Bringing back their quarterback Luke Altmaier. They lose their stud 2 defensive linemen. Their defense last year was not good, even though their defensive line was good. And so it's going to be really interesting seeing how Illinois navigates, because I feel like it's starting to get to the point with Brett Bielema that they need to have a good year. Like, they bring in Brett Bielema. Everyone thought that they were going to be like what Wisconsin was when Brett Bielema was there, and we have yet to see it. And if they have like another bad year, I think you're going to start seeing the hot seat for Brett Bielema. So this year is a pretty big year for Illinois. And unfortunately, I just don't see them being that great again. Yeah. They just don't really have, they have a couple good players. They lose their running back, the Reggie Love to Purdue, which I thought was kind of interesting. So I don't know. I think.
And I feel like it's like they bring in like the last go around, they bring in Lovie Smith. Everybody's like, oh, he's going to be able to turn it around. It's like, no. Now they do, Brett Bielema, and it's like it's taking a little bit longer than expected. And yeah, they're losing Jerzon Newton on the D line, who's a stud, and then, I don't know, is Isaiah Williams still there? I can never remember.
No, he's gone.
Top receiver's gone. So it's like, at what point, are you, it doesn't seem like they're able to replenish that talent that they've already had. So it just makes you wonder, how will Illinois stack up? I don't expect them to have the best year by any means. I think they'll struggle a little bit.
And then with Northwestern, I just want to bring this up with them is I keep forgetting they actually brought in Their new offensive coordinator is from South Dakota State, which I don't know if he was the head coach at South Dakota State or no, he couldn't have been there. I think he was the offensive coordinator at South Dakota State. And South
Yeah.
Dakota State, man, very good program in the FCS,
Yep.
right? So they should be better offensively. They bring in quarterback from Mississippi State, I think he's from, and he's kind of like a running type quarterback. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that all works out. I'm still like sitting here today wondering why Brendan Sullivan like left them. Did he know that he wasn't going to be the starter, or was it maybe more just like, the new offensive scheme? Was it, he just thought that this team isn't going to be very good. I kind of want to go somewhere else. Like, I don't know. Like, it's just going to be very interesting to see how Northwestern is, because at the end of the day, like they very much over exceeded expectations last year. I remember when we did our Big Ten preview last year, this was after Fitzgerald got fired. We both thought like, wow, they're going to be lucky to win like 2 games.
I said, like, we didn't expect to win a game, maybe one, but like we were, they went crazy last year with, Big Ten Coach of the Year, David Braun. How well deserved. To turn that dumpster fire around was insane. I just think it's very hard to replicate that on a consistent basis, like for a team like Northwestern. So could they have a down year? Yeah. Do I think that they can still be competitive in some of these games? Absolutely. That head coach has proven that. So
exactly. He seems like the next, like for me, it's like, how we always kind of struggle against Northwestern. Yep. I feel like that's like, he's like the perfect fit for Northwestern, where it's like, we're always, once again, like every time we play Northwestern, which it won't be every year, by the way, but we do play them this year. It's always going to be that game where it's going to be kind of like a grinded out game with them for whatever reason. We do get them at home.
That could be a team we lose to, or, a game we're not supposed to, but they just that's a tough out for sure.
Yep, exactly. All right. Well, that will do it for this episode. Like I said, the hope was that everyone listening, you just kind of pick up on like just a few things, and like the goal is like, now you kind of know a little bit about the Big Ten, maybe some players, some different things. There was a lot of coaching changes and things like that, not really at head coach, but more like at the coordinator positions. So we try to touch on that. And so that is the goal of this episode. Now, the next episode that we're going to do, which we're probably going to record probably tomorrow, but we won't have that out until maybe a week after this episode releases. We are going to do our Big Ten over and unders, where we don't go through each team's schedule like, okay, this game's a loss, this game's a win. But what we'll do is we'll just do each school, we'll pick their over under. We might touch on like 1 or 2 games that are big for them, or whatever the case may be, and we'll have that out probably a week after this episode comes out. So that will do it for this episode. Until then, guys, you guys have a good rest of your week, and go Hawks.